Let's be flies on the wall as we eavesdrop on a dinner conversation between Jeff Zucker and Bill Carter. Okay, take it away, Bill.
Thanks. Jeff, it's great to be with you.
Thank you. I think they're eavesdropping.
Yeah. I think you're right. People have asked me this, and I suppose I have to check this with you, but
No, I don't have the plane in my
garage?
in my
No?
garage.
Okay. Someone said out in Amagansett you have a lot of room, so maybe you could have, no. But that is the so-called 777 in the room. People obviously have been asking you this everywhere you go, I'm sure.
Yes.
Do you think your coverage was ever excessive, or was it completely consistent with the news value?
Well, look, I think that you can always go back and look at any news coverage that you do on any story and say you might have done this or that a little differently. But if I take a step back from our coverage of the Malaysian plane disappearance, I'm incredibly comfortable with it. I feel very good about what we did. I believed early on, right from the start, that it was an enormously important story. An American-made Boeing jetliner with Rolls-Royce engines with 239 people aboard disappears into thin air. And I thought it was an incredibly important story, and that's why we devoted the resources that we did to it. And then it turned out that in addition to that, in addition to it being incredibly newsworthy, there was incredible interest in it. And so, as I look back on it, I feel very comfortable with it, and it continues to this day, where Inmarsat today has announced that they're going to put out their data, which I think we should all see, and so I feel very good about it.
So during this, while it was going on, it started out, there was obviously huge interest. It led the evening news
For
every
2
night.
weeks,
Right,
2
every
weeks in
night.
a row,
Yeah.
which I think was the first time that had happened in years.
Right.
Yeah.
But it sort of became CNN's story. You wanted it to be your story, right?
Well, listen, I think that's part of what we're trying to do in redefining CNN, which is that when there is a story of that magnitude, we want to own it. And I think the other thing that is sometimes forgotten in this is that we are uniquely positioned to be able to cover a story like that. This was a story that stretched from Beijing to Kuala Lumpur to Perth, Australia, and frankly, there are very few other news organizations, certainly television news organizations, that are positioned like us, like that. And so, frankly, we had a huge competitive advantage in our scope and reach and ability to cover a story like that. And I think that we took advantage of that and covered it, frankly, like no one else could.
And was it your call every day? Like, guys, we're doing this. Your show leads with it. You're all supposed to lead with it. Were you directing it that way?
It's not quite that explicit, but I think it, was implicit that I thought it was the story of those 2 months. Now, I think the other thing that's forgotten is that the one other story that was going on during those 2 months was what was happening in Ukraine. And, I don't think that we shortchanged the Ukraine story at all. We had 6 reporters in Ukraine on the story. Again, I believe certainly more than any other television news organization, and probably more than almost any news organization in the world. And so we were able to cover both at the same time, although I think a lot of people didn't, really see the Ukraine coverage in the midst of all the plane coverage. But it was never that we sat around every day and said that I had to say, you're going to do this, but it was certainly understood that I thought it was, that those were the 2 stories, and that the plane clearly was of both immense interest to me and to the audience.
Okay, but were there any mistakes made?
Well, listen, I think that there's always things that you would go back and do. We're on 24 hours a day, every day. There are 10 correction boxes a day in the New York Times, but they're buried on page 2. When we make a correction or make a mistake, it's out there for everybody to see, right? So, I think that we've all made fun of Don's comment of, did it fly into the black hole? Now, he was being facetious, but it did not come off that way, and he knows that if he could do it over again, he wouldn't quite present it that way.
Mm-hmm.
Beyond that, I'm comfortable with our coverage.
It became sort of the fodder for
Well-
jokes all the way up to the president saying,
Yeah.
this CNN couldn't find its table, I guess, at the dinner.
Right.
But
So I have a couple thoughts on that, which
Yeah.
is one, listen, part of it is that everybody was watching our coverage, right? And people were watching CNN. We still go, everywhere we go, everybody's asking us about the plane, right?
Right.
You just started and we've done the first 5 minutes
Yep.
on the plane.
Right.
Okay? So, and by the way, I don't object to it at all.
You're not surprised.
One, I'm not surprised. Two, I don't object to it. And three, it's still of immense interest. You can lose your iPhone, even though you don't have an iPhone, but you can lose your iPhone across the street.
BlackBerry, yes.
Right, right.
So does he. It's okay.
Correct. But you can lose your iPhone across the street and you can find it, okay? We found we just lost the most sophisticated flying instrument in the world, okay? So there's immense interest in it. But yes, people have made fun of it and, all the way up to the president. The fact is, look, it's part of what we're also trying to do at CNN. CNN is relevant. We want to be relevant. People are talking about us. Sometimes they're making fun of us. That's okay. Just spell CNN right. Now, some people still misspell it, but that's okay. Look, we're part of the conversation in a way that, frankly, we hadn't been for a while, and so that's a good thing.
Okay, well, two last things on it. Are you
We can
frustrated?
go 25 minutes if you want.
But we have many topics to cover.
Okay.
But are you frustrated the story has no ending, the way I think many viewers are?
Well, I mean, it's not my job to be frustrated by it, right? It's our job to cover it, and we continue to cover it. And I think the one thing that I don't want us to do is to just drop it, just because there's no ending, right?
So how much do you do a day on it now?
I think we're, look, it's back in the news today because Inmarsat is releasing the data, right? So that's an important.
You mention it every day still?
I think it gets mentioned every day. Yeah,
Yeah.
totally. And by the way, you know who asks us to mention it and not drop it every day? Are the family members of the 239 people who were aboard. Every day that we're on, they say, please don't forget us. Please keep covering the story. And you know what? 239 lives were lost there. You cannot forget that.
Mm-hmm. And the last thing is, are there lessons from it that you've taken, like, that you sort of will apply to other?
Yeah, I actually do think that for us as a news organization, there have been things that we've tried to discuss as a news organization that we've learned from covering that story, and how we covered it and how we talked about it, and we are trying to apply that, frankly, to other stories and to the, obviously there was massive interest in that story, and you can't replicate that interest in necessarily every other story, but I think you can replicate some of the techniques that we used to cover it. I think we were incredibly creative with our presentation, our graphics, our show and tell. I think, look, people wanted to talk a lot about the fact that we put Martin Savage into a simulator, and then we put him at in the submersible, right? But listen, hey, I don't apologize for any of that. We were creative, right? And you know what? You know why we stayed in the simulator so long? Because so many other news organizations were begging to get into that simulator the minute we gave it up.
I see.
Okay?
So don't give it up.
So the minute we were like said, it's enough of the simulator, and you know what? Oh, Diane Sawyer's on the phone, wants in on the simulator. Okay, fine. We'll stay.
Okay, well, the other thing that's happening at CNN is that you're really reshaping your prime time. And your idea is to do more long form and get away from the host-centric hour, I guess. And so what's your plan there? What are your expectations?
Yeah. So actually, that process actually begins tonight.
Right.
At 9 o'clock, we've decided to move away from the interview program that has occupied that slot on CNN, for almost 30 years, first with Larry King and then with Piers Morgan, for a variety of reasons. One, I just think that the specific interview program like that isn't as necessary as it once was. That I don't think that there are as many compelling interviews that last for that long or that can be booked on a daily basis. We will still do the interviews. The fact is, last week Anderson Cooper had Donald Sterling and then Magic Johnson. So it's not like we're abandoning the interview. We're just gonna put them in a different place when appropriate, instead of having to rely on it every night. And at the same time, the fact is that, the cable news audience is not a growing news audience. Is not a growing audience, and so we're going to continue to service that audience, but we're also going to try to expand it by bringing in other viewers who might be interested in informational-based, educational, entertaining programs, like, for instance, Anthony Bourdain, Parts Unknown. I was in this building for 3 hours at lunch today for the Peabodys, where Anthony was honored with a Peabody for that program. That's the kind of program that we want to do at 9 o'clock every night, and that actually starts tonight on CNN. So we're gonna still provide news and breaking news and always be there for that. I don't think there's any question about our commitment to breaking news, as evidenced by all the questions about the plane. So we're still there whenever that happens. But we're going to supplement that with some different kind of storytelling.
But the storytelling, those shows you're going to do, they are, I would expect, more expensive.
Well,
And-
they are, but it's also
and longer in the planning and.
Well, they
yeah.
are, but they also, unlike necessarily a live hour, can repeat many times. This is where we're going to use the cable model as opposed to the news model,
Yeah.
right? So where the news model, you're live all the time. The cable model is that one episode of Parts Unknown will run 30 times.
Yeah.
And so you amortize the cost of that over multiple exposures.
Okay, so give us a few examples.
Of the kind of programs
Yeah.
that we're going to do. So obviously, Parts Unknown with Bourdain
But that's
is one.
That's on the weekends, right?
Well, that airs in its originals on Sundays at 9.
Right.
But is airing this week at 9 o'clock during the week. Morgan Spurlock has a show called Inside Man, in which he takes us inside many different aspects of culture and life. We've signed Mike Rowe, who was incredibly successful for many years on Discovery with the biggest show on cable for many years called Dirty Jobs. He's going to do a program at CNN called Somebody's Got to Do It. We've signed Lisa Ling to explore American culture. John Walsh, who had great success for many years at Fox as a host of America's Most Wanted, is going to come to CNN to do a show called The Hunt, where he's going to look for fugitives for CNN. We're also, Bud Boltman is here, who oversees our in-house documentary unit. And this is a unit that actually 2 years ago at CNN had pretty much not been shut down, but very much decimated in terms of both the number of people who are working there and the number of projects we're working on. And now we're going to produce in-house this year, some 40 hours of programming that will also fill these slots. So it's a different type of storytelling, and that will fill the 9 o'clock slot.
And is it partly because CNN has staked out what it considers the middle ground? It doesn't try to emulate the other news channels which have advocacy positions. And is this a way for you to continue that without an attempt at least to be more competitive?
Yeah, well, look, I think there's a couple of things. I don't think that our competitors are necessarily news channels, right? They're political talk channels.
Are they propaganda channels?
Well, I'd say they're political talk channels. and that's a good try, though. And listen, and I'm not saying that in any negative or derogatory way. They're very good at what they do, but they're political talk channels who have staked out their ideological grounds. We are trying to do the news and present the news, but and not take an advocacy position like they are, for instance. But what we want to be is relevant and essential when news breaks, right? And news doesn't break all the time, and so I think it's been a fair criticism of CNN that CNN has been a little bit like an insurance policy. It's there when you need it, right? We want to fill those gaps between breaking news stories and provide compelling, programming that will bring people back when news is not breaking. And it's been hard for us to figure that out. This is an attempt to try and get at that.
But one of the vulnerabilities of the other model is that the audience for that is getting much older.
Correct.
And in fact, I think the audience, particularly at Fox News, has now reached almost 65. I think it's 65
The
plus.
average age of the Fox News audience is 68.
Right. So it's 68.
That's the
median.
average.
The median
That's
age.
the median
Yeah,
age.
that's the median age. So they have half the audience much older than that. So economically, are you looking for an advantage? If you can pull in somewhat younger viewers, you have a counter to them.
So, I mean, that is a very fair point, which is that the average age of the programs like Parts Unknown and Inside Man is considerably younger than the average age of the traditional news programs. And so, obviously, one of the things that we're trying to do with this kind of programming is fill in the gaps between breaking news stories and also provide some appointment programming and also bring down the average age of those who are watching CNN. And that has worked. The average age of those programs is considerably younger.
So long range, can that be your sort of bulwark?
Well, I don't know that
going
it's our
forward?
bulwark in terms of, look, we are still going to be a news channel.
So you'll drop that when there's news, obviously.
When there's news, it's gone like that. There's no one needs to be confused about that. But right now it's an hour a night of our programming, right, during the week. And so, right in prime time. And that's what we feel is the appropriate amount. Could I ever envision a day down the road where it would be more? Perhaps, but that's not on the table today.
Well, the other thing that's interesting is that you obviously have to shift, I think, economically, you have to look at this, but also just demographically, you have to shift some of your attention to digital, don't you? Because
Well, yeah.
many of the people under, 40 are not really looking at television for news, they're looking at their device.
So I think one of the advantages that CNN had, and this, frankly, long predated me and is one of the great things about CNN, is that it moved into digital very early. And so CNN's strength in the digital sphere is very considerable, not just in the United States, but globally. Certainly in mobile, which we think is the real digital play going forward, CNN is the #1 news provider in mobile around the world, globally. And again, this is because of the foresight of many people many years ago. And so digital is an incredibly important part of CNN worldwide. It doesn't get talked a lot about. People want to talk about CNN US. People want to talk about the plane coverage and things like that, and that's fine. I don't object to any of that. But one of the things that gets lost in not talking about that is our considerable strength in digital. In the United States, CNN.com is #2 only to ABC News Yahoo combination because of the portal of Yahoo. We don't obviously have a portal to provide that kind of traffic, but we're #2 to that. Like I said, mobile, we're #1 around the world. This is a huge focus for us, and I think it speaks to the global brand strength of CNN. And people know that when news happens, they go to CNN and those 3 little red letters on whatever device they're using.
So the brand really is actually the most important thing you have to protect, is it?
Brand protection is the most important thing for us. And frankly, outside the United States, Tony Maddox is here, he runs CNN International. Outside the United States, there's almost nothing like CNN.
What's your main competitor?
Well, listen, I think
BBC?
there's 3 global, I think really there's 3 global networks, right, in terms of television. There's CNN, there's BBC, and there's Al Jazeera. But frankly, neither BBC nor Al Jazeera has the strength in the United States that CNN does, right? Mm-hmm. So if you want to talk about a truly global network that is strong here and abroad, I think that's CNN, which is to take nothing away from BBC and Al Jazeera, who both do excellent jobs. But I think, if you're looking at global strength, CNN is unmatched in that. And outside the United States, as you know, CNN's brand strength. I worked, as you know, and as was said, I worked at NBC for 25 years. If we go to Ukraine, nobody knows who NBC is, right? You go to CNN and everybody knows who CNN is.
Mm-hmm. All right, two last quick ones from me. There's a lot more attention being paid to climate change as a news story. What is CNN going to do to cover that?
Well, I think you're probably referring to a report that said that CNN had not done a tremendous amount of coverage of climate change. And, you know, I think that's both, it was true, it is true, and probably something that we need to do more of. You know, on the other hand, I would say that climate change is one of those stories that deserves more attention, but that we all talk about, and we haven't figured out how to engage the audience in that story in a meaningful way. And that when we do those stories, there does tend to be a tremendous amount of lack of interest on the audience's part.
Really?
And I think
Still,
that there it is.
And what
that's
about
just the truth.
blowback? Are
That's
you
the
concerned
truth.
about blowback?
Blowback from whom?
From conservatives who say this isn't a story.
No, I could care less about that. You know, we think it's a story. I think we have to do a better job of figuring out how to make it more interesting.
All right, here's my last one. Will you cover the Benghazi hearings live?
You know, that's a good question. I don't know the answer to that yet. I honestly don't know.
Well, what will make you decide it?
Whether we decide that it is of real news value and newsworthiness. We're not going to be shamed into it by others who have political beliefs that, you know, want to try to have temper tantrums to shame other news organizations into covering something. If it's of real news value, we'll cover it.
So, and how will you determine that has real news as it goes on?
Well, at the
or-
time, listen, I mean, I think we're a long way from that right now. The Democrats haven't even decided if they're going to participate. Let's see what happens. But, you know, I think that's a question that we will have to answer when that time comes.
Okay, we're going to open up for some brief questions. If the audience has a question for Jeff, and surely somebody could think of something I didn't think of. But,
There's one back there.
okay.
Hi, Jeff. Alan Chernoff is one of your former reporters, CNN. I wanted to ask you, if you're saying the most important objective is to protect the brand, do you worry that you could dilute the brand by extending beyond news, by having infotainment on the air?
Not at all. First of all, I don't see what we're doing as infotainment. I actually think that, you know, let's just use Tony Bourdain's show as an example. You know, I could make an argument to you that I've learned more about the places he's traveled to than many of the reports that air on every television news organization about those places. So I think to qualify them as, or classify them as infotainment is not to give full credit to the strength of those programs. And as far as protecting the brand, I actually think Tony Bourdain and Morgan Spurlock and programs like that have actually enhanced the brand.
I think there was one in that area, but the lights are so
Yeah,
bright.
it's hard to see.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Yamish. I'm a student at NYU, and I wanted to talk to you a little bit about kind of the future of CNN, the journalists that you're looking for. You used to have multi-platform or all-platform journalists, and from my understanding, they became field producers. I could be wrong, but they kind of became producers. They used to be kind of one-man bands for CNN. Could you talk a little bit about what kind of journalists you see CNN wanting to hire, and kind of what you think about the idea of being multi-platform as a journalist? Or do you want people that go the traditional route and are just really good? I mean, not to say that they're not just really good on TV, but there's the broadcast reporters who their goal is to be great on TV. Or do you want people that can kind of be multi-platform?
So I would say, first of all, congratulations on your award tonight.
Thank you.
And second, and second of all, I think you asked a really important question, and what we've tried to do at CNN over the last year is understand that there really is no difference anymore between a reporter for television and a reporter for a different platform, in most cases digital. And so what we're looking for are actually people who, one, are good reporters, and two, can work on any platform. And frankly, we've hired several reporters who are digital reporters first, and then sometimes they appear on television. But frankly, I would actually suggest to you that if your only singular platform going forward, that's probably not going to be the best way to find a job. I think whether you're at the New York Times or you're at CNN or any of the other great organizations that are represented here, I think you have to be multi-platform.
Okay. Can we get a mic here in the front? Here it is, coming over this way.
Thank you very much. Edith Lederer, the Associated Press Bureau Chief at the United Nations. As someone who has watched CNN International quite a bit on travels and postings, I wonder why in a world where globalization is so increasingly important that there's such a disparity between CNN International and CNN Domestic, which is far more local. Don't you think in some ways you're doing a disservice to the American public in not giving them that broad scope of international news?
Well, I think that, first of all, as you know, CNN International is available here in the United States in roughly 30 million homes. So, there is that option to watch both, and that's part of why we don't want to do the same broadcast on both CNN and CNN International at the same time, because they are both available. Obviously, CNN International not to the same degree. Secondly, I think it's obviously CNN International. I think it's a fantastic product, as you say. I think it's a little unfair to characterize CNN US as local and not global in its presentation. The fact is, when I think about what's happened, over the last few weeks, the fact is, no one in the world has covered the disappearance of the Nigerian girls more than CNN US. We've had 3 reporters in there who have been on CNN US. CNN US was the only network that sent a doctor, Sanjay Gupta, to Guinea, Africa to cover the Ebola crisis. CNN has had 6 reporters in Ukraine, all of whom have appeared on CNN US. So, yes, it is a different presentation than CNN International, but the fact is, our coverage, whether it was the plane, Ukraine, Nigeria, Guinea, frankly, has been a huge part of CNN's coverage, and I'm incredibly proud of the global presentation on CNN US as well.
All right, we're going to take one more question. Anyone else have a question? Over here, way over to my right.
Hi, I'm Rong Xiaoqing. I write for Xingtao Daily, a Chinese language newspaper. I wonder, like a few years ago, after the Tibet riot, there was a huge anti-CNN protesting in China. I'm wondering whether that had any impact on you guys, and have you been doing anything to communicate with the Chinese viewers by there?
You're not familiar with that?
No. I'm not familiar with that issue.
How is your relationship with the Chinese government now covering China? Because it's obviously fraught for many news organizations.
Yeah, I understand. I mean, look, like every news organization, coverage in China is never as easy as you want it to be. We recently had one of our reporters in Beijing a few months ago detained while covering a trial there. We continue to cover China, but it's never as easy and as fully free as you would want it to be. But it's a story that's incredibly important, and that we continue to cover.
Well, let me just say, you're back in news. You're having fun?
I am. I'm having a great time, and I'm incredibly proud to be able to, represent the 4,000 worldwide employees of CNN.
Thank you to Jeff.
Thank you, Jeff Zucker. Thank you, Bill Carter.